Welcome back to The Grind for another update to my champion tier list for Marvel Contest of Champions. Now, the standard disclaimer, this is not an end-all be-all of which champion is better than another. It's a general guide to help you decide which champions might have more value for your account than you might think. And it is ranked in a way based on my personal experience with and understanding with the champions and the game, but it's also influenced by others' experiences and the impact and feedback that they have provided. Now, this tier list is not meant to be a these champions are better than these champions, which are better than these champions, but it's meant to be a general guide of how much of an impact I think a champion can have, and to give you a bit of a snapshot into, depending on where you're at in your account and your progression in the game, which champions you might have more value in ranking. So if you have a very small roster, there's a lot of champions that you would really benefit from having and ranking up. So if you pull a champion like Storm Pyramid X as, your third or fourth 5-star champion, that is amazing. Storm Pyramid X has so much damage. She can prevent champions from shrugging off her parries, so you don't have to worry about that, which is not a very common skill or trait for champions to have. So I want you to look at it that way. Roster dependent is a tier that some accounts will find a use for those champions. They'll fill a specific need, and for the most part, they will do that well. So those champions, they do have some good value to add to an account. And if you have a small roster, these champions will likely benefit you depending on the other champions that you have. The situational roster is, or the situational tier is more of one that, they can fill specific needs, but they're not as valuable as others. So if you really need a champion that does one specific thing and a champion in the situational column does that for you, then you should rank them up, because all in all, this game is about finding answers to problems that you're facing. And you're not going to continue to progress in the game as quickly if you're waiting for the best answer to a problem. So a lot of the champion rank ups that you do should be focused on helping you overcome the next barrier and take the next step further in your progression. Of course, you do have to consider fun as well. So shout out to all the tiers. If there's a champion that you find that is fun and you really love playing them, rank them up, because you'll find a place to use them, and one day they might get buffed. So I'm going to quickly break down the tiers. I did add a new column for this tier list update because I continued to have issues deciding whether they were in the strongly considered tier or roster dependent tier. So I'm hoping this will make it a bit easier. Top tier, we'll start there. They are no-brainer rank ups. Most accounts would benefit immediately, whether they are just the best at doing something or they have a ton of utility. That is the column where if you pull that champion, they are pretty much a no-brainer rank up, because you'll find a use for them or a need for them if you don't mind playing them. Now, I have heard, for example, people don't like to play Professor X or just have never bothered playing Professor X, but he has a ton of utility, pretty much infinite damage potential. He can gain buffs, and he has a miscounter. He has a way to falter the opponent, so you can get attacks on the opponent without having to parry or intercept. So he has a lot to go in his favor. And if you don't like playing him, that's fine. You don't have to rank him up. This is not a list to say you have to have all the top tier champions. But I do find that a lot of times people are waiting just for the top tier champion pulls. But we're going to see how a lot of these champions do have a lot of value. Now, the worth it tier is the new tier that I added, and this is right below top tier. Now, this is where I say, they don't quite meet that top tier requirement, or they don't, in my opinion, they don't really seem to fit in with the category in the top tier. But most players will still find a really good use for these champions right away, or it'll be nice to have in their roster regardless of what their roster looks like. So even if you have all the top tier champions and you pull one of these worth it champions, if you enjoy playing that champion, they are really worth the investment and you will benefit from having them. The next tier is strongly considered. This is like a don't overlook these guys, because they have a lot to offer and they can do some pretty amazing things. And so if you pull one of these champions, you just might want to take a closer look and see if that they have the thing that you're looking for, or you just enjoy playing them. So the strongly consider is, they're going to be great for most accounts in general, and they may fill a specific need. They may fill that specific need very well. Then the roster dependent, we kind of already talked about. Depending on your account, these champions might do something amazing. For example, Storm Pyramid X in the roster dependent category, if the opponent tries to shrug off her parry stun, she puts a passive on instead. And there's not a lot of champions that can get around tenacity. And so this is a very, very important ability for a champion to have that is not very common. And if you pull her early on in your progression, it'll make a lot of things a lot easier if you invest into her. Plus, she has tons of damage, especially paired with Apocalypse being a horseman. You know, she can do some amazing things. Then the situational column, I think I already mentioned that they have some value, but for the most part, they're not going to do as much as other champions would. But if you have no power control champions and you pull Psylocke, she is pretty much a power control goddess. And if, again, paired with Apocalypse and being a horseman, she can do some insane things with tons of damage. So don't overlook the situational column either. And then the mag column, we don't usually talk much about them. For the most part, they're not really worth the investment. But again, if you love them, some of them are decent. They can do some decent damage, or they have a piece of utility. And so the ones with the stars are ones that I have kind of tried to label as, if you get them very, very early on, like you're still working on Act 4 or Act 5, these might be champions that you might want to invest a little bit in because of the damage that they can put out or because of a piece of utility that they might have. But for the most part, they're not quite worth the time. So we're going to talk about the new champions first, and then some modifications and just some examples of champions. So first, Sauron. Sauron I'm putting in the roster dependent category right now. Sauron doesn't have a ton of utility, but there are some things that he has to offer. He is very suicide friendly. He has the ability to regen or lifesteal, so he's very sustainable as well. Now, he doesn't really have any drawbacks from suicides. He is immune to poison, and he is bleed resistant, so he takes less damage from bleed, and so he actually heals from the bleed from those masteries. So you know, you might actually not want to play him as much if you don't have the recoil tree masteries unlocked, because the damage might seem underwhelming. But with the recoil tree masteries, Sauron's damage is actually decent, and this is a pretty good champion in general, just for basic use if you do run those masteries. Now, other than the sustainability, he does have access to prowess effects, and he does, like I said, some decent damage. He's pretty simple to use, and he does have access to unblockable effects as well. So there are a few things that he does, and he's a pretty simple, easy to use champion. So you might enjoy him. He's also kind of a cool, he's like a dinosaur. So if you like that, you might find even more fun playing him. But for now, roster dependent. And now Toad, I'm putting into the strongly considered category. Toad is going up here because he has a bit more utility, and he has better access to damage, in my opinion. He has the ability to place poisons on the opponent. He is himself poison immune, and he has access to prowess effects, passive regen effects, great damage with a little bit of build up. You throw some special 1s and then a special 2, or you can play in a weird way, which is better with synergies, where you back up to the corner, let yourself get hit a couple times, which will build up your prowess effects, and then because of being in the corner, when you get hit, you actually will regen a little bit back, and with some synergies, you can decrease the amount of damage that you're taking while that happens, and then you have very quick ramp up with your prowesses. You attack in a little bit, get your poison stacking on the opponent, get your power built up, and then throw off a massive special 2 for some huge damage. And there are some videos already out there that show that you can pretty much with one cycle doing that, backing up to the corner, getting hit, building to a special 2, and throwing it off, that pretty much kills Act 6 and 7 opponents. So that on its own is pretty nice to have. He also has ability to place a slow debuff on the special 2 and access to passive stuns. So he has a lot going for him, and the damage is quite nice once you build up to it, depending on how you choose to build up to it. And now we're going to talk about some champions that I moved up a little bit, which I did overlook recently with some previous synergies. Now, Annihilus actually recently got a synergy with Sauron, and that actually allows Annihilus to much more easily build up his Furies. And so it's very easy and practical to get the max amount of Furies with Annihilus. Now, Annihilus overall is a pretty well-rounded champion, and with the ability to more easily access his damage, he actually turns out to be a solid champion. And he has a lot of access to debuffs, which is great for like Distract. He also has easy access to buffs, so it's great for buffed up. He is immune to Incinerates while he has his Rod active, which for most fights you should be able to keep active constantly. And then with that active as well, he's immune to Power Steel, which is a somewhat rare trait. And in some situations, it is very nice to have that immunity. And so with that one synergy with Sauron, that allows him easier access to damage, he actually does really good damage. And so he's moved up into the roster dependent tier. There are other champions that do much better damage, and there are better Incinerate immune champions, or, a lot of times these champions just do different things. And so having, Annihilus answer Distract, answer buffed up, have Incinerate immunity, and, immunity to Power Steel, there may be specific situations that he's the best answer. And so I wanted to make a note of him being moved up. And similarly, we've also moved up Spider-Man Symbiote with, I forget which synergy it is. I meant to write that down and I forgot to write it down. But he also has a synergy that allows him to ramp up the damage quite a bit more. And so if you, pull him really early on and you don't have a high damage dealer, Symbiote Supreme can be that champion for you. So take a look at some videos on him. Now, in general, let's take a look at some examples of where champions are falling. Now, I put this new category in with worth it to help, differentiate the tiers a little bit between worth it and strongly consider. So we'll just point out some differences here with the science class. Now, the science class rankings is one that I've been struggling with because, there are some champions that are really good, and then it just kind of starts to get really blurry, and you could totally mix and match these top 3 tiers in some degree. But for top tier, I've decided that Quake, Torch, Mr. Fantastic, Captain America, and Void are in the top tier. Now, some people might say, why is Mr. Fantastic up there, and why is Mr. Negative not up there? And honestly, Mr. Negative may be moving up into the top tier soon. I have Mr. Fantastic up there because of his ability to do just crazy things against passive power gain. And it's kind of like Void, and he is compared to Void oftentimes actually, but the benefit Void has is that he doesn't have to hit the champion or do anything to the opponent at all in order to do that. The problem with Void is that to get into that kind of situation where you're controlling power gain and healing, Void has a bit of RNG factor because you can't control which debuffs are going to trigger on the opponent first. Mr. Fantastic, on the other hand, you have your pre-fights. You put your pre-fights on and boom, it's effective at the very start of the fight. However, in order to keep it active throughout the fight, you have to knock the opponent down intermittently, and he was buffed in the recent past. That made it a lot easier because his debuffs now last a little longer. And so you can very easily keep this active the entire fight. And with the special 2, you can double those effects, and I think once you do a second one, you can triple it. And so you can have a little bit of time to ramp up to the maximum effects, but with the awakened ability at high sig, he has increased power gain. So you can do that much more quickly when awakened. After the opponent throws a special 1 3 times, if you bait it out 3 times, then that starts to kick up your power gain quite quickly. And so he can do a lot of good things there. Also, with a synergy team, he can have passive damage over time on with all of his debuffs, similar to Void as well. So he can get a lot of damage passively done as well. So you can take on champions in the Abyss with him and just do heavy attacks the whole time. Double and then triple your debuffs with your special 2 to amplify, that passive damage, and then just keep doing heavy attacks and slow playing the fight. You can also throw off your special 3 to get a Fury buff that that increases your damage based on how many debuffs you have on the opponent. So he has a lot to offer. She-Hulk is an amazing champion as well. A lot of people put her in the top tier. I struggled with having her up there, and maybe that's just because of my personal experience. I have a 6-star unawakened that I haven't ranked up. I have a 5-star at rank 5 that is awakened, and I rarely ever use her. And I don't know if it's just because I I enjoy playing other champions, and the answers that she brings, I feel like I don't mind playing around them, or the champions I enjoy playing more also answer those. But she is a very good champion with easy access to slow, so she can counter, unstoppable, and evade very effectively. When she's awakened against science champions, she can shrug off debuffs, which is nice. She has almost limitless damage potential as well with the Furies that she stacks, but it's hard to stack those Furies high against small champions because the Furies effects last longer against larger champions. And so it can be a bit tedious depending on the opponent that you're facing. But against large champions, you can stack up a lot of Furies. And the very nice thing actually about those Furies is that they also provide somewhat of a taunt effect. So they're more likely to throw their special attacks, which does make things a lot easier in controlling the fight once you get enough of those Furies going. Now, Mr. Negative is an amazing champion. He does have a lot to offer. He has tons of degen damage. He has the ability to trigger an intercept on the opponent by gaining light energy and then charging your heavy, and that will evade the opponent and hit the opponent as well at the same time as he evades, and that evade and hit counts as intercept, and then you can also attack into the opponent. I do have some videos on him. Just take note, all the champions that have their name in blue and underlined is a link. You can click on that champion and it'll take you to a video that I have. It's not the only video that I have, but a video that I currently feel is the best on my channel to highlight their potential. And Mr. Negative is immune to stagger and Fate Seal and nullification effect, so he's great against matchups where you don't want your buffs to be taken advantage of. And then Red Hulk, I've heard some people wondering why he's in that worth it tier. Red Hulk, he has poison and incinerate immunity, essentially pseudo immunity with the poison, and that for a long time has been a very great combination to have. He also has really good damage. Once you ramp up your Furies, he's amazing with the Suicide Masteries. He hardly is penalized at all with them. And a lot of his damage comes from secondary damage, burst damage, which bypasses a lot of things like rage or damage caps. So it can be very nice to have that. He also has access to incinerate damage as well. So that's why he's there. I can't talk about every single champion, but I'm trying to highlight some of the ones that give an idea of why they are where they are, and ones that have been questioned in the past. So if there are specific questions about why a champion is where they are, then put it in the comment section below, explain why you think they should be somewhere else, and I'll try to make a comment on it in the next video. But I hope that this is a helpful tier list for you to kind of get an idea of where I value opponents. I'll make another comment about Punisher 2099 because I'm considering taking him to rank 3. Now, he has some decent damage. He has access to armor breaks. He has access to almost complete power denial, especially with synergies. It makes it even better. And so he is like really good at power denial, and his damage isn't that bad. So it actually turns him into a pretty solid champion for a lot of situations. And I don't think that he's in a tier where, you should probably rank him up regardless, because then I would put him up into worth it. But a lot of people do love using him, and I'm planning to take him to rank 3 because my 6-star roster for tech isn't that shiny, if you will. Now, I did recently pull Guardian and Ghost, both of which are champions that are much better off with high signature ability. And I have both of them at max sig 5 stars. So I don't see myself wanting to take them to rank 3 unawakened in the near future. So that's kind of where I'm at, and I don't have any of the other champions until you get down to the strongly considered tier. I do have Howard the Duck, but Howard the Duck I have maxed out as a 5-star. I don't have any of the other ones in that tier either as a 6-star. And Punisher 99 fills a need, a very niche need, something that I don't really have a ton of necessarily, and I don't have him ranked up as a 5-star. So he is one that I think I'll be taking to rank 3 as a 6-star pretty soon. So I hope that this tier list was helpful. Let me know what your thoughts are, and if you're still listening, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.